Hey there. So today I want to talk a little bit about ancestral connection. I used very specifically the word ancestral connection and not other words. I believe very much that for the most part, many of us experience the idea of ancestry and ancestral connection as an aspect of our healing. That's really important to mention. I think for many of us, I hesitate to use the word all of us. We experience ancestry and ancestral relationships as traumatic ones. Many folks who I speak with along this work are usually talking about how they have received and inherited traumas from the past through their ancestral line. Many times, people will have a lot of trouble connecting to ancestry because of those particular traumas. And I have a lot of understanding and a lot of relationship to that. I too entered my own journey down this road as a result of my issues with ancestry, because of my issues with family, because of my issues with family dynamics, because of my concerns around the problematic nature of many who would be technically considered my ancestors. And I think for all of us, we and get to explore this material in a way which is really dynamic and really intense. There is, however, I think, a really important opportunity in exploring the gray area of our families, gray area of our ancestry. Even if we have great relationships with our immediate and sometimes living ancestors, if we go back far enough, we always find tricks and we always find things that were maybe skipped over. And I think anybody who studies ancestry inevitably ends up studying history, because history is the story of us. It is the story of humanity. It is the story of our people. For me, ancestry and the study of ancestry always inevitably brings us further and further back toward this one moment in history. And I always refer to this as the moment of first mother. The first Homo sapien, or not quite Homo sapien, who held the first Homo sapien baby in their arms. The moment when we as a species fully began to incarnate. And that for me it's an objective moment. It's not a subjective moment. I don't need to make that up. For me to have existed requires thousands and thousands of generations into the past to have existed. And for me, what it really brings us back to, is this concept of humanity beyond ethnicity, humanity beyond culture, humanity beyond history, humanity beyond the little aspects of what makes up a human's day-to-day existence. There's a political truth of humanity. There's a historical truth of humanity. We can look at it sociologically, anthropologically, psychologically. All of those are valid lenses and frameworks for viewing our ancestral path. But ultimately, it is the story of organisms making their way through space. And for me, ancestry is inevitably tied up in this concept of love, that all humans that exist are, whether we like it or not, the result of generations upon generations upon generations of love, that we can't necessarily go back and attribute to a specific feeling, a specific person, a specific anything. But anybody who has ever had a family member or a partner or a friend or someone who they care about, that they have experienced love for, we know that there is at the heart of that, or within that, caught up within that, an element of self-sacrifice that we are willing to make for the other person. So, which is to say that love is what motivates our actions when it comes to furthering the lineage, the genetic memory of our people, of our species. I think too often we only follow the line back to a specific culture, and that's really where we start to get bogged down in things like racism. That's where we start to get, let's just take these runes really specifically, right? We can go back and say, oh yeah, this is part of my ancestral heritage. And this came as a result of exploring my ancestral heritage, and has nothing to do with my ancestral heritage if I follow it further and further back in time. This is just one cultural expression of heritage over thousands of generations. And so if I continue to follow it back, right, especially as a Sicilian person, I can say that very specifically my ancestral journey takes me kind of probably likely all over the world, likely ties me in with so many other people from so many other cultures. How dare I assume that I can only draw my lineage back to a certain point? And that for me is where we, just like where we get into problematic moments, it's where we can also see ourselves past problematic moments in our relationship to other people. For me, there is at the heart of all human relationship, the essence of connection is about respect. And that is what really my understanding of love, as I understand it, kind of grows from. Because I mentioned love already as this kind of energy of I love my offspring, and so I want to make sure they survive. That's kind of a self-serving love on some level, right? In that it matters to me that my line continues, and so we can say things like legacy, we can say things like lineage, we can say things like, there's a thread of selfishness that can be tied up in there. This is where the story starts to take a little bit of a spiritual, kind of non-physical element to it for me personally in my experience. And a lot of my healing sessions, I include a conversation about ancestry. I always try to remember, or I always try to remind people that the ancestors are with you. Right? The ancestors are with you. And that means something very different to someone who, let's just say, has a transpersonal understanding or relationship to ancestry than someone who has a very physical, tangible relationship to ancestry. So for me, the first time I really experienced what I believe as love beyond ownership, right? Unconditional love, was as a result of a meditation and a series of meditations, a series of exercises I had done around healing my own ancestral line. I won't go too far into it in this video, but for me, it was from an ancestor, a specific ancestor, that I was able to kind of, in a moment, experience, kind of this kind of overwhelming sense of, oh, shit. That's what love is. I've been doing it wrong. I've been doing it wrong this whole time. And, I was in my late 20s, really, when I experienced it. And it changed my relationship to all other humans, period, no matter what. I said to myself at that moment, if I cannot say that I'm being a servant of this kind of love, this love beyond boundaries, this love beyond ownership, this love beyond conditions, then my love might not be as pure as I think. My love might be a little bit more manipulative than I'd like to imagine. My love might be a little bit more transactional than I'd like to consider. my love might be a little bit more about getting what I want than actually meeting the moment and the relationship where it is, and really acknowledging what the moment is asking of me to be beyond what I want from the moment. And that was a reckoning for me, as a young man coming up in America, tied up in the idea of like, I want to see a better world. I like get so angry when I look around me. I was, really radicalized by the environmental movement. I was really radicalized by anti-capitalism. I was really radicalized by a lot of things that had made me very angry, that had made me very resistant to love. And I had experienced a lot of family trauma that had made me, again, very resistant, very closed off to the idea of love. And this isn't a story about the time I took drugs, right? This is just an experience with an ancestor in meditation. And I really had to spend the next decade, 8 years or so, examining every relationship that I had formed, that I was forming, and that I would go on to form through this very different lens of ancestry. And for me, that foundation of love is the piece that we all can then radiate out. The way that we hold relationship beyond manipulation, beyond domination, beyond conditions, allows us to then form relationships in a new and healthier way. And it allows us to embrace each person, I believe, as a human sibling, right? As a member of this human family that is intrinsically and inevitably, if I go back farther enough, everyone is my cousin. Everyone is a sibling to me. For me, I believe as an animistic practitioner, as someone who's connected to ancestry, connected to animism, radiates out. I have that same love for animals. I have that same love for plants, for minerals, for the earth itself, for the stars above, for the sky, the air that I breathe. And that, I talked in a previous video about gratitude. That same unconditional love is really kind of born of that sense of gratitude and kind of bolsters gratitude. And so for me, all of the ideas kind of caught up in our community regeneration, kind of thought and philosophy is that everything is actually meant to self-support. Everything is meant to build on itself. In another video, I talk about, if it's just ancestry, yeah, I'd probably become a racist fascist real fucking quick. But if it's ancestral connection tied in with gratitude, tied in with love, tied in with communication, tied in with this idea of animistic connection to all other beings on the planet, we arrive at a very different place in a very different relationship, because there's this web, a net of emotionality and emotional content, as Bruce Lee liked to talk about, right? What's the emotional content? Me fighting someone to, say oh, you made me feel bad is, kind of childlike, kind of petulant. But me saying, I stand before you because you threaten the line, you threaten all of these things, allows me this moment of saying, I will not back down because this is bigger than me. This is about more than me as an individual. And that for me is an extremely challenging and an extremely rewarding change in our perspective and our perception of reality. So, I'm going to cut it off here because I don't want to go too long into this meditation. I think I could probably talk about the various aspects of it over and over and kind of deeper and deeper. And, maybe one day we'll release a longer video talking about it all. But, I want to just use this opportunity to say thank you very specifically if you've followed me all the way down the rabbit hole at this point. I really want to share my gratitude for you and for your work to connect with your ancestors, to connect with the human ancestors, to connect with the ancestors that bring us back to First Mother and First Father and the struggles that humanity has really traversed over thousands of years, hundreds of thousands of years, to arrive in this moment, this moment of challenge, this moment of transition, this moment of change. And without each of us making that choice, without each of us holding that unconditional relationship to love, I don't believe that we as a species will be able to manage this shift. So, thank you very much. I'll see you next time.